Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. It's an important day. For the record, I'm Michael Hinojosa, Superintendent of the Dallas Independent School District. And first of all, I want to publicly thank the board president at DCS with her comments that she had in the media that it is business as usual for our employees. And I definitely agree with her that, and by the way, we're very proud of the employees. Everybody did a great job this morning. We had one call, and that call was from a bus driver, is do I still have a job? So we had no other problems in this cold, rainy day in Dallas this morning, and I'm very proud of the DCS employees for doing the right thing, and I'm very proud of their organization for stepping up and helping this transition start in an orderly way. So I agree with her that we will continue to need all of these employees, bus drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, routers, all of those employees will be needed for the balance of the school year. What will change almost immediately is the management and the governance of this agency. So let me describe that. And first of all, I want to thank, we don't know to this day officially until the Controller of Public Accounts rules which law we're going to follow, whether it's 1566 or 2065. They both passed at the end of the session, and there's some dispute about which one passed first. We've been operating under the premise of 1566. And so, and I also want to thank all of the 8 component districts who have voluntarily met with me for the last month and a half, every 2 weeks, being prepared for today should the voters decide how this election would turn out. So almost immediately, within the next 3 days, the Controller of the Texas Controller of Public Accounts and his team will appoint a dissolution committee within the next 3 days. This dissolution committee will meet for the first time next Wednesday, November the 15th. That entity will follow the Texas Open Meetings Act to the T, and so there will be an organized way. So who comprises that dissolution committee? That is totally up to the controller, and we have not heard from the controller this morning, but we expect to hear within the next 72 hours who will make up, and that's what the dispute in these 2 bills are. But we've been operating under the premise of 1566, so who's on that committee? Well, the controller will appoint a financial advisor, a certified public accountant, an auditor, and a bond counsel, and the superintendent of the largest system, and that's in both bills. One of the bills says that each component district will also have a seat on that dissolution committee, and that's the premise we've been operating under. And then also, one of the bills says that the commissioner can also appoint an individual to be on this dissolution committee. So, regardless of the outcome, if we're told we have to follow 2065, then I'm going to ask, since I have a strong feeling I'm going to be one of those individuals, that we have an advisory committee of all the component districts if they determine that we have to follow 2065 to the letter. And we'll have that advisory committee advise both the CEO and the dissolution committee of how to proceed on every item. So we're going to follow the spirit and the intent of the law as the voters so decided yesterday. So then what happens after that? Well, immediately at this meeting, it is my anticipation that the dissolution committee will consider the appointment of a chief executive officer to run the agency for the balance of the year. And that is prescribed in the law, and this entity will have to move swiftly to make sure that there's not a leadership void during this time. So depending on which interpretation we get of the law, that's what will follow. So what happens next after that? After a CEO is appointed, and now this dissolution committee sets up a cadence of meetings, public meetings, as to how the business of the DCS will be run over the next several months. Well, some of the major decisions that will have to be made, according to the law, early in 2018, districts will have to decide whether they're going to outsource this very important service that we all depend on, whether they're going to develop their own, or maybe a hybrid where a number of the districts go in together in a cooperative arrangement to provide those services for their community. So those decisions will have to be made early on. In the spring, also, the distribution of the assets, as is outlined in both laws, is a very critical decision that the CEO will recommend to this dissolution committee as to how they will proceed. And then we have some complexities at the end of the term, because unbeknownst to a lot of people, there are different fiscal years. A fiscal year for the Dallas ISD ends on June the 30th, and our new year starts on July 1st. Well, DCS and a couple of the 3 districts that we're talking about, their fiscal year does not end until August 31st. So there are some complexities to be determined, and the employment of these very needed bus drivers, dispatchers, and routers will all have to be worked out in the next several weeks after this event goes forward. Again, I want to assure the bus drivers and the dispatchers and all the employees of DCS that they have a position that they're highly needed for the next several months, and regardless of what happens in the future, these entities will still need transportation services. And so they will have an opportunity to either work for an outsourced company or for one of the school districts should they decide to have their own. So this is the information that we have as we know it today. Thank you for your interest, and now we'll be glad to entertain any questions that any of you may have regarding anything that we've laid out for you today. Yes, sir.
Taxpayers are going to win in this new arrangement?
I think that the taxpayers in the end will be pleased. There will be some one-time costs, such as owning. If you're going to have your own system, you have to have a bus barn, and we have to undo the issues of the service centers that have been used to be owned by the taxpayers. So there may be some one-time costs. We're going to present to our board next month, our plan, and we think that eventually, after the one-time costs are handled, the taxpayers are going to be better off.
What is DISD's estimate in terms of how much more or less will it cost DISD to run its own bus service?
We're not prepared to say that. One of the things we don't do is get ahead of our board members, but that precise answer to that question, we will present to the board on November the 29th as to our estimate about what we're going to need. We think the number is going to be less, but until we have the opportunity to share that with the board, we don't want to get into the details of that because they'll have a lot of questions about what's needed. But we think that in the end, it'll be less. Maybe not the first year because you have capital acquisitions that you have to have. And there's also another thing that we don't know because we've asked for vehicle identification numbers from DCS. So we don't know how many of those buses that are assigned to us are leased and how many of them are owned outright. So once we know that and the committee decides that, that's going to have a big impact. But we know that we couldn't be able to afford this on our own without the voters speaking on this important topic.
How will you come up with that additional capital to make that transition?
Well, one of the things that I did is I did a request from my CFO and about who were our biggest vendors. And our biggest vendor is TRS, Teacher Retirement System. Our second is the IRS, Internal Revenue Service. And our third biggest vendor is DCS. And we spend $54 million. So we think that we need to just analyze the $54 million that we're currently budgeted and see how much we're going to be eligible for transportation reimbursement if we own the vehicles. So all of that will be laid out for the board. We think that eventually, though, with all that data in front of us, that in the end we'll be better off and we will be able to save the taxpayers some dollars.
¿Qué le podría decir a los padres con respecto a cómo podrían mejorar el servicio para sus hijos, ya sea que ustedes decidan contratar un servicio externo o manejar su propio sistema de autobuses?
Para los padres de familia les quiero decir que nada va a cambiar en este momento. Para ellos, los estudiantes los vamos a recoger cada mañana y vamos a ver cómo podemos mejorar este servicio para el año que viene, sea con nosotros mismos haciendo el servicio o con alguien que nos ayude. Pero para los padres nada cambia en este momento. Nada cambió esta mañana. Todo operó todo bien esta mañana. Gracias.
¿Qué podría decir acerca de las quejas que ustedes han tenido en el pasado con respecto a los servicios que manejaba el DCS?
Bueno, es muy importante que los autobuses lleguen a tiempo y no estamos contentos que los autobuses no llegan al tiempo de que deben llegar a las casas y también aquí a las escuelas. Y tenemos que mejorar eso en el futuro.
Have any districts asked to collaborate with the ISD? Is that something that the district's interested in?
That's something we would consider. We have had some of those discussions. We know that 3 of the districts may go partner together because of proximity. We are spread out, and then others are in different parts. There are some districts that only use, there's one district that only uses the service for a very small population, and it's special ed. So there are things that we could work with in an interlocal partnership. One of the districts happens to own their own service center, so they're going to be much better poised. So it's like 8 different stories as we've talked to the 8 different districts about their current situation. We have learned that many of them are doing requests for proposals. We have studied that, but it's going to be very difficult for someone to handle us externally unless we did a hybrid solution. So we're considering all those items, but those kind of conversations have occurred over the last few weeks. Some of them are at much higher level of readiness to take us over. Others are obviously very preoccupied or concerned about what the next step will be.
Do you want to be in the bus business?
No, I don't want to be in the bus business. However, this is an important service to us. When we went from transporting 50,000 to 27,000 students in a 5-year period, and we went from 80% economically disadvantaged to 90% economically disadvantaged, those numbers don't jive. And so we need this service. Don't want to be in it. I've been a superintendent for 23 years. It's not fun. It's hard work. However, it's very important that this service be available to our community. And if we have to step up and do it, we're willing to do that if necessary.
Do you have a preference for insourcing versus outsourcing, personally, or a hybrid solution? What's your personal preference at this point?
I don't have a personal preference. Every district I've been in, we've run our own. I've never had an outsourced situation, although I know of superintendents who are very good friends of mine who have had the other, and it worked well. A lot depends on the contract and the availability of the companies to pull off that service, so it really depends. My experience has been with in-house service, and so that's what and it's never been easy, never. No district I've been in has this work been easy. We know the challenges that DCS is having, and they're real. But at the same time, we need better service. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Hinojosa, in terms of being a customer of DCS's, at what point in time did you realize that their service provided to the children of this district wasn't worth the money you were spending?
And it took a long time for me to come to that. I was a student in Dallas, and for almost 100 years, they've been our provider. I rode the buses, no problem. When I was a teacher and a coach in Dallas in the 80s, it was never a problem. I don't know that they've ever been great, and I don't know that they've ever been bad. When I was superintendent in Dallas 1.0, it wasn't a big issue. It was normal course of business. Things changed. When I left and came back 2 years ago, when we were trying to get our kids to school, and we sat around our conference table the first day of school, and there were so many anecdotes coming from choice schools, from school leadership, from every department head about us not getting kids to school. I knew then it was different. I didn't know why. As we've gone through this process, I think when they left their core competence of providing transportation services and started venturing in other opportunities, I think is when they lost their focus. So since I've been back, it hasn't been great. But I think it just kind of evolved, and some of the reporting that the media has done gave us information that we didn't know. And so, and it was very difficult during this legislative session for me to be the only person up there testifying. But it's just the experiences that I personally saw for the school district that showed me that something was amiss. I didn't understand the scope of it until all of these things created this perfect storm that we went through over this past year. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Why do you think that the experience with Dallas ISD over the past couple of years has been so different from some of the other districts that came out and said we want, that we're in favor of keeping Dallas County schools?
I have no idea. I can only speak from our perspective, and it was a constant conversation around our senior staff and the level of service that we were getting and the cost per student that was just not appropriate. I can't speak for them. You need to ask them why they were happy with it, but we were not, obviously. One or two more questions.
With all of the
Superintendente.
complaints about the job that the school bus drivers have been doing, how will things be different if the districts retain these same bus drivers?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of training and development that needs to occur and focus. And so I can't promise you that it'll be better. It's my expectation that it has to be much better. And that's what we will focus on. That's what I will hold our deputy chief, our deputy superintendent responsible for, is to make it better now that we own it. And so if that's where we end up.
Superintendente, mencionó que el cambio no será inmediato. ¿Le podría explicar a los padres cómo se va a implementar esta nueva iniciativa?
Sí, para los padres de familia, nada va a cambiar. Lo que va a cambiar es quién maneja esta organización. Pero los autobuses y los que manejan los autobuses van a trabajar hasta el año que se acaba este año. Y el año que viene depende de dónde están las familias, en qué distrito. Todos los distritos van a tener un plan que va a ser diferente que lo que es en este momento, pero hasta el año que viene.
El año escolar.
Sí, el año escolar. Gracias.
As a member of this new dissolution committee that'll soon be formed, a two-part question on this. The DCS has been withholding records from us, of things including a record of an internal investigation that they conducted there. Will you push for the release of those kinds of documents that are in DCS's records currently? And secondly, there's been some discussion there about cutting off pay for the former superintendent who is still on the payroll at DCS after all of the problems that occurred. Any thoughts on that contract and whether you would push to sever ties with that person?
Well, thank you for asking the question the way you did. Let me answer the second question first. I won't comment on personnel matters, but that topic will be discussed. On the first question that you asked, yes, if I'm on the committee and we'll know in 72 hours, I will push to make sure that everything be transparent. But I'm one voice. There will be other people who have the ability to make that decision. But it's not going to be that simple because from my understanding, there have been lawsuits filed and things filed and appeals made. So we need to see what all those complexities are. And we're going to hold the new CEO accountable for making recommendations about how all of that works. But yes, the short answer is I will push to make that information transparent and available, especially since the Attorney General has ruled that information needs to be released. One more question.
Just a point of clarification, Dr. Hinojosa, the concept of having a committee that dissolves an agency, but also having a CEO of the agency.
Yes.
So how long does that CEO stay in place? That's where I'm trying to get a firmer handle on.
That CEO is going to work their way out of a job because their job is to, in an organized fashion, implement this law that says that this agency will not exist at the end of their fiscal year. So that individual is not an interim and acting. They're the CEO for the balance of the life of the agency. After that, that individual will not be employed by this agency because it won't exist. Now, should one of the other districts want that individual to come on, that will be their decision, depending on whether they go inside or external. But that is a very key appointment, and that will be in place until the balance of this execution of this law.
What's your bottom line message to parents about this interim period and the transition?
Last question, thank you.
Okay. The bottom line is that, and I think the DCS employees, they want a job. They want to do a good job. And so nothing will change from the employees' part. I think what will change, though, is from the management and the governance of this